Hey everybody, thanks for watching. This is Andrew from Schnauzerface Minis. I know it's been a little while since my last video, but I've been busy recently. I actually just got married a couple weeks ago, and if you need proof of how awesome my wife is, take a look at these pictures. She actually asked me to make wedding cake toppers out of our favorite War Machine models. I love her so very much. And today I'll demonstrate painting a Space Wolves Terminator. I want to start by saying thanks to Randy from Gunslinger Games in Dallas, who donated this mini for the tutorial. I appreciate it, bud. This is a really straightforward tutorial, so I'll spend some time answering questions I get a lot. I'm priming with Vallejo Polyurethane White Primer. It works great through the airbrush without any thinner. The black primer goes on a little bit easier, but the white works well if I use multiple thin coats, with plenty of drying time between coats. It takes a little bit of patience, but it's definitely the best white primer I've ever used. For airbrushing, I use a Harder & Steenbeck Infinity with a 0.15mm needle, which I absolutely love. I've previously used a Pache Talon, but I upgraded because I wanted a smaller needle. The Infinity is super easy to disassemble and clean, and the dual action is so much more intuitive than the Pache, but I really love that airbrush too. The 0.15mm needle is both good and bad. I can get extremely fine lines and really precise detail, but it's incredibly small, so it'll get clogged fast if I'm not careful. I've used needles up to 0.66mm, but that's way too big for my taste. If you're looking to get into airbrushing, I'd say a good starter size for a needle is somewhere between 0.25mm and 0.38mm. That'll give you good precision, and it's a bit more forgiving so you won't have constant clogs, which is really annoying. A lot of companies make great airbrushes. Badger, Iwata, Harder & Steenbeck, and Pache all make great products. But the time spent practicing with your airbrush is far more important than the name printed on the side of it. There's no need to get a super expensive airbrush. Find something in your budget and put in the hours to master it and you'll definitely be rewarded. For thinning, I've tried a bunch of different mixes. I really like the Model Air thinner Vallejo makes. The VMA paints really do respond well to it. Plain distilled water works okay too. Mostly I'll use a custom mix of 50% distilled water, 40% drying retarder, and 10% Liquitex Flow Aid. The drying retarder really helps prevent paint from drying on the tip of the needle, which is one of the biggest pains while airbrushing. The only downside is the drying retarder makes the paint stay open a little longer, so I'll have to wait between coats just a bit more. But that's just what I use. If you've got a cool custom mix or a product you swear by, please post it in the comments so we can all benefit. One tip, if you're mixing paint directly in your airbrush, add the thinner first and then the paint. Otherwise you risk sending unthinned paint through the gun, which is definitely bad news bears. Each paint is going to require a different amount of thinning, but if you swirl the paint around in the airbrush cup and it runs down the side easily, you've got a proper consistency. If it just coats the side of the cup and stays there, then it's too thick. If this is a NyQuil commercial, you want the one that doesn't coat. One thing I really stay away from is using Windex as a thinner. Some people swear by it, but the active ingredient that helps the paint flow is ammonia. I don't want to atomize ammonia and breathe that crap in. Even if a respirator will protect my own lungs, it'll get in the air and I don't want my wife or pets to suffer just so I can airbrush a little easier. If you've got a great ventilation system set up, it may be worth a shot, but it's something I'm not personally going to try. Here I'm using about a 10-to-1 water to ink mix to shift the model slightly toward blue. This is obviously an extremely thin mixture, so I also added a few drops of matte medium to make it a little easier to work with. The regular paintbrush I use is the Winsor & Newton Series 7 Kolinsky Sable, size 1. They make a Series 7 line specifically for miniatures, but I don't really like those because the belly doesn't hold much paint at all. If you're still using cheap craft store brushes, I can't encourage you enough to treat yourself to one of these nice brushes. The difference in control is hard to believe. The Kolinsky Sable brushes are a little bit pricey, but if you look around online you can find pretty good deals. I actually found my local art store, which is way overpriced on everything, always sells their Series 7 brushes 50% off the retail price, so you may want to call around before buying anything online. It needs to be a serious art store though. Arts and craft stores like Michael's and Hobby Lobby don't carry these brushes as far as I can tell. I also get a lot of questions about these Vallejo liquid metal paints. If you're not sold on these just by looking at them on this video, I guess the camera just doesn't show them off very well. They're so much more reflective and realistic than any acrylic metallics I've come across. They can't be mixed with water or water-based paints, so sometimes it's a little frustrating to mix the color I want, but I think it's worth the hassle in the end. I have used these through the airbrush and they actually worked a lot better than I expected. But if you do that, be sure to thoroughly clean out the airbrush with alcohol. Any other water-based cleaner could cause the metallic pigments to rust, which would really screw up your airbrush. In the last couple years, I think airbrushes have become the new must-have tool in our hobby, and I really think that weathering pigments are the next big thing in wargaming miniatures. The thing that's really going to help pigments take off is how versatile they are. I almost hate that they're called weathering pigments so often, because weathering is really just scratching the surface of what they can do. They can definitely be used on skin tone too, to add some really smooth, really convincing shadows or color nuances. Vallejo makes some good weathering pigments, but their color selection is limited. It's basically a line of rust, dirt, soot, and ash colors. Go to your local art store and grab an artist pastel. Grind it down with a file and you've got instant pigment. I'm pretty sure that Secret Weapon Miniatures also has a line of colored pigments, but I have not tried those out yet. I've really taken to using oil washes over ink or paint washes because they're so much more precise. Ink washes, like the traditional GW stuff, will dry quickly and will be extremely challenging to clean up if I slop the wash where I don't want it. Oil paints have an extremely long working time, so I can lay down the wash and come back even a few days later to do the cleanup, even if it's dry to the touch. Oil washes are more work than just throwing some Devlin mud on there and calling it a day, but it is definitely worth it. I always start by prepping the surface with a gloss varnish, which will help the wash flow into the recesses. Once the wash is dry, which really won't take too terribly much longer than an ink wash, it can be easily cleaned with some fresh mineral spirits. If I was using an ink wash, I'd have to go back and repaint all my highlights to cover up the wash's imperfections. With an oil wash, I can just dab it off with a Q-tip. When an oil wash is dry to the touch, I'll always seal it in place with a matte varnish. My favorite is Tester's Dull Coat, which is pretty much the standard. But the problem with Dull Coat is that the weather has to be on your side. If it's too hot or too humid, it can leave an ugly, frosty finish on the model. I live in Fort Worth, Texas, so it's always too hot and too humid. So a lot of times I end up using Liquitex matte varnish through the airbrush. I find it mutes the colors a whole lot more than Dull Coat, and it's also closer to a satin finish than a true matte finish, but it works in a pinch. One big recommendation I have is to thoroughly clean out your airbrush immediately after using gloss or matte varnishes. If the varnish sits in there and dries, it becomes really difficult to clean it without taking the whole thing apart. This is another 10-to-1 mix of water to paint with a few drops of matte medium thrown in. I'm just trying to add a small glowing effect around the eyes. For this to work, the eyes need to be really bright, so I went back and retouched the whites on the lenses. The snow base is made using a mix of regular Snowflock and Woodland Scenics water effects. The water effects goes on white, but it'll dry clear. Deciding on the ratio between Snowflock and water effects is up to you. If you use more water effects, you'll get a slushy, icy look. If you use more Snowflock, it'll be more like powdery snow. I also put a few icicles on the edges just for fun. And I certainly did have fun with this video. And I just want to say I really appreciate all you guys watching. It means a lot that you take time out of your day to watch these tutorials. If you have any friends who might be interested, or you visit any wargaming forums that might find this video useful, I'd really appreciate it if you consider sharing it with them. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day.